and the membership, I'd like to welcome you all tonight for this exciting event. We're here for the Victoria Writers Festival. So big round of applause. We took a lot of work to get this here. To get this started, I'm going to introduce you to Cynthia, let me get this right, Cynthia Woodman Kirkham. Come on in, come on in. Big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Hi, I am the representative of the board tonight for the Victoria Festival of Authors, and so I would like to welcome you all here. I can't see any of you, so this is kind of cool. And welcome to A Word After a Word After a Word. That really gets the sense of the process, doesn't it? And it's featuring tonight Joseph Gakwinak-Kanasam, Sonnet Labbe, Tim Lilburn, and Susan Sanford Blades. The Victoria Festival of Authors and Langham Court Theatre are located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and listeners. Thank you also, I must say, to our sponsors, the Canada Council of the Arts, the CRD, the City of Victoria, the Victoria Foundation, and Langham Court Theatre. Also, the Walrus and Monroe's Books. Thanks to the Writers' Union of Canada, who has sponsored Susan's appearance at our festival. And thank you also, many thank yous, of course, for an event like this. Thank you to Moe's Home Collection and Poppy's Floral Art for providing our background. That's kind of sweet. Right, so tonight there will be a 15-minute intermission midway through this event. The concession will be open, but please note that no beverages are allowed in the theater. There are 2 gender-neutral bathrooms across the hall, and the closed captioning is provided and can be accessed through your phone or tablet. So please ask a volunteer for the Wi-Fi password and the URL link. At the end of the event, books will be available for purchase and signing. So now I'm going to introduce to you the moderator for this evening. This panel is hosted by Barbara Pellman. Barbara is a retired high school English teacher and author of 3 books of poetry, with a 4th to be published by Caitlin Press in fall 2023, so that's now. Many of her poems have been published in literary journals and won contests. She assists Planet Earth Poetry reading venues, organizing workshops and retreats. And so now please welcome Barbara Pellman.
Hello? Hello. We're on. Good. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I can't see any of you because of the lights, which is usually a very good thing. So I'm delighted to be here tonight and to be able to be with these 4 marvelous poets and writers and songwriters. I think it's quite wonderful that we begin the Victoria Festival of Authors with a Works in Progress panel discussion, because usually we see all the little pretty things finished and you get to buy them, but to actually see the writers in process, struggling and sweating and changing and editing, I think is really the heart of what everyone as writers are doing. So here's what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to introduce all four of these people one at a time. And then there will be, each of them will do a reading from their work in progress, which may or may not be what they thought they were going to read in the first place. And then we will have a 15-minute intermission. After that, we'll come back and I will ask some questions of the four people. And then in the last 10 minutes, you will get to ask questions as well. So prepare your questions, and we will just get going for a fantastic evening. Okay, we begin, once I get everything together here. Better? Thank you. Okay. First, we will meet Joseph Gagwinagonasam. Joseph is a member of the James Smith Cree Nation. He's a graduate of Simon Fraser University's The Writer's Studio and the Writer's Studio Graduate Workshop. His work has been published in the 2022 anthology Resonance, Essays on the Craft and Life of Writing by Anvil Press, and the Humber Literary Journal, and Emerge, which is the Writer's Studio anthology. He was shortlisted for the 2020 CBC Nonfiction Prize, and his manuscript, Woodland Creatures, which I think became My Indian Summer, right? Was awarded the 2014 Canada Council for the Arts Creation Grant for Aboriginal Peoples, Writers and Storytellers. He lives in White Rock, BC. Used to. That's what you get for reading biographies online. My Indian Summer, his debut novel, is an exploration into the history of intergenerational trauma. But his next novel, which we will hear a little tiny tantalizing bit of, is in the genre of fantasy fiction, where he discovered a certain freedom or liberation of voice. He has worked his share of Joe jobs, as he calls them. He's been a bicycle courier, a library assistant, a truck driver, a construction worker, a ditch digger, a prison cook. Now he is a graduate of the Writer's Studio Creative Writing Program, and he is officially an author. In 2020, he was shortlisted for CBC's Nonfiction Prize, and earlier he was chosen for the Writers' Trust of Canada Rising Stars program. So this is Daryl McLeod's comment in choosing him. Joseph Gagwinagonasam, I really tried really hard. Writing is deliberate and skillful, magic and meticulously raw. In a lyric style that is both intimate and hypnotic, Gagwinagonasam breathes life into his characters at their first mention and draws you into the gossamer web of his vibrant storytelling, from which there is no escape other than to read the story through to the end. Welcome, Joseph.
Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Oh, okay, great. Okay, I guess what I'm going to read you guys is called Storm Cloud's Treat. That's the working title for this piece. I just finished a whole whack of edits, actually last 3 days, so what I had submitted is completely different from what I'm going to read to you guys today. So here goes. This is the prologue to Storm Cloud's Treat. Otter Bearchild and his cousin Raven Standing Horse had set the last of their snares along the family trap line. They stood at the edge of the forest and looked down upon the vast plains. It was as if the sun had stopped for a quick rest to sit upon the horizon, blazing tangerine orange and casting long shadows before it slipped behind the distant mountains. Their sharp eyes followed a small wagon train that crawled at a snail's pace across the grassy landscape. A sudden wind picked up, and both men felt the coming snows in the crisp morning air. The long harvest season was welcome, but it was a prelude to an even longer and colder winter. Bearchild and Standing Horse welcomed the winter as a time to spend with community, to rest, fatten up, and relax with plenty of food and family. The two men missed their wives and children. Bearchild shook his head, wondered what the settlers were thinking, traveling at this time of year. Their horses looked hungry and protested as they struggled to pull the disheveled wagons. The sound of crying women saddened Bearchild, and the voices of the men who argued with the leader, who was dressed in a fancy navy blue coat. "What do you think?" he asked his friend. They're crazy. Traveling this time of the season? It's a bad idea," said Standing Horse. Bearchild follows Standing Horse. "They're gonna freeze." Not all of us thought it was a good idea to accept the white nation at their word. We gave them health and a means to survive on our land, and we agreed to share equally. Turned out sharing is not in their nature. Our leaders made a bad decision to let them roam wild. Now we're stuck with them, cousin. "What do you think? Were we wrong to trust the white nation?" asked Bearchild. Standing Horse shrugged his shoulders. "I'm an apprentice medicine man. I don't see the future. That's Creator's job, just like them white people, right? Just because we know they won't survive the winter, Creator might have another plan. And just because we can smell snows doesn't make it so." "Well, I'm just saying, they don't know our ways or the land. Maybe we should warn them." Bearchild had hinted at the risks of starvation. What if they run out of food? What if there are children in that group? "You're the Bearchild apprentice, sacred protector of the people. What do you smell? Can you sense a Witago?" Standing Horse stopped and turned to face his cousin and waited for Bearchild to answer. Bearchild's telescopic vision seen nothing unusual. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, nostrils flared. His olfactory senses would detect anything if they were there. He searched other senses. Nothing. "They're only a bunch of white people." Standing Horse turned around. "Come on, before they see us." His tone indicated the end of the conversation. But at the back of his mind, he wondered if Bearchild was right to worry. The next day, Bearchild and Standing Horse checked the traps that they had set days earlier. It had started snowing during the night, and they both felt the temperature change and tasted the smell of snow. They'd been away from the village for a full moon cycle, and with the shorter days, the sun moved quickly towards the west. Back at their camp, the sun had slipped low, touched the horizon, and shone through the trees that cast dappled shadows on the forest floor. "Been thinking about them white folk the other day," said Bearchild. "And?" said Standing Horse. "You think they're okay?" "Who knows?" Standing Horse jumped a small creek and Bearchild followed. "They look pretty set up. 3 wagons carries a lot, eh?" Bearchild shrugged. "Well, they might survive a couple of weeks, but I doubt they'll make the winter." "Yeah, maybe," said Standing Horse. "Should we go looking for them?" asked Bearchild. Standing Horse spoke in a pacifying tone. "Tomorrow. When we get back to the village, you can ask the elders." "You think they'll survive that long?" asked Bearchild. "Let Creator decide, cousin," Standing Horse said. "I'm sure with all their fancy wares, they'll be fine come spring thaw." Standing Horse knew what his friend was referring to. Creator forbid cannibalism. That's what caused people to become the Witago in his land, flesh eaters. Bearchild was not hopeful, and for the remainder of the day felt a heavy weight in his gut and a sadness in his chest that hurt his heart. That night, Bearchild lay under his blanket. He listened to his cousin's soft snore, heard the wind change directions outside their small hut. He shifted from his back to his side, then onto his back again. Time crawled. Bearchild closed his eyes, focused on his breathing and the beating of his heart. The wagon train was his only thought before sleep caught up with his busy mind. The next afternoon, they returned to the village with their pelts and their winter meats. And when Bearchild had a moment, he took the first one to go talk to the elders. A day later, Bearchild and Standing Horse were asked to go look for the white people. I could be back with my family, enjoying the winter solstice preparations, and you had to go open your big mouth, said Standing Horse. He followed Bearchild out of the village. It took 3 cold days of hard travel to get to the place where the 2 men last seen the wagon train. Deep, narrow tracks were obvious, even after a month of blowing winds. They cut their way through with axes and saws. It killed innocent trees, and they leave a path of destruction behind them. Such a wasteful way to travel, said Standing Horse indignantly. They're not hiding, that's for sure, agreed Bearchild. And that should tell you something about the white nation, Standing Horse said in an argumentative voice, selfish and thoughtless. For 2 days against the biting snow, they followed the tracks through the swept prairies. On the second day, it was close to evening when they set camp, started a small fire, and prepared a warm bed with heated rocks covered with earth and thick furs. After a modest meal of dried meat and a fortifying tea that warmed their bellies, they settled into rest under a hut of willow and hide. A small fire between them kept the warmth in and vented through a 4-inch hole at the top. The sun had completely set. Stars splashed across the inky black sky. Outside, under the low hum of the northern lights, they left their larger fire to exhaust itself in the shifting snows. Within the wind, rising and falling howl, Standing Horse thought he had heard the sound of deep whispers, the thudding of heavy footfalls. He looked over at his friend. Bearchild was wide awake. They used sign language to communicate. They continued to breathe like they were sleeping. Standing Horse began to fake snore. Against all of his fear, Bearchild moved to his knees to peek out the flap. The fire burned, and a howling wind carried the snow and tiny ice crystals that hit his face. He breathed deeply, and a cool tingle grew like a slow dawning. Bearchild thought back to the white people, the prickling in his fingertips and toes. His breathing slowed, heartbeat heavy in his chest, and his nostrils flared wide. And when his pupils dilated, he saw it, just out of reach of the fire's light, like a shadow within a shadow. Their eyes were black pits, teeth stained dark. One of the Wheat-to-go wore a tattered blue woolen coat with brass buttons. Bearchild recognized it immediately. We're too late, he thought. Wheat-to-go, said Bearchild.
Oh, aren't you just about ready to see what's next? Thanks, Joseph. Our next reader is Sonnet Labbe. So let me introduce Sonnet. She's a Canadian poet, editor, professor, and critic. She has a PhD in English literature from the University of BC, a master's degree from the University of Guelph, and a BA in film and video from York University. There has been a script reader and taught English at universities in South Korea, as well as teaching creative writing at the University of Toronto. From 2012 to 2014, Sonnet taught creative writing at UBC's Okanagan campus, and they currently teach at Vancouver Island University. Sonnet is also a reviewer of fiction and poetry for the Globe and Mail and has written scholarly articles on Canadian contemporary poetry. They are currently on the editorial board of Brick Books and on the poetry editorial board of the Malahat Review. Their work has appeared in a number of literary journals, including Forcefield and Red Silk, an anthology of South Asian Canadian women poets. sonnet received the Malahat Review Long Poem Prize in 1999, was shortlisted for the CBC Literary Award for Poetry in 2010, won the B.P. Nicol Chapbook Award in 2017, and was shortlisted for the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize in 2020. Phew. Here are some comments about L'Abbe's books. In her delicately architect but toughly envisioned poems in Strange Relief, which was her first debut collection, L'Abbe surveys the world and finds it both beautiful and unjust. She portrays that complex world with luxurious rhythms and a vocabulary that invites us to marvel at language's infinite possibilities. L'Abbe invented the process of sonnets Shakespeare, her next book, well, not her next book, but her previous book, to find a way to sing from a body that knows both oppression and privilege, touching on such themes as gender identity, pop music, nationhood, video games, and the search for interracial love. This book is a poetic achievement of undeniable scope and significance. But this new work is different. It's moving her in somewhat different directions, though what is song but poetry? And what is poetry but music? They had their first solo performance of songs and poems at Nanaimo's Port Theatre in 2021, and we get the second sonnet.
Hi there. So yeah, my most recent book is Sonnets Shakespeare, and that was a long project of a kind of erasure that involved overwhelming Shakespearean text with my own work, and it was really very much about silencing, and trying to use the visual print of the page to grapple and represent silencing. And it's great to have the concrete poems out there in the lobby. I don't know if you saw those. So that's like a particular period where I was using visuality to try and say the things that I find English, given that English is the colonial language and my heritages are not from that language. So much of my emotion and feeling around belonging and wanting to create culture on these territories grapples with the reality of having been taught and raised in this language, and that it's my main tool. So I'm going to read / speak / breathe to you 4 poems that are songs that are poems that are songs that are poems that are songs, because lately I'm very interested in orality, what it means to like put down a text that's actually for the body. So the first one is called Whoosh, and it's actually from my second book. I wrote it as a poem to begin with, and I now perform it as a song, but I'm going to read you this text and then move on from there. So this is Whoosh. By this dim moon's light, I invite you to my mind. We are meeting in a darkness. We're setting out to find the words to the mission we're supposed to set in motion, to retune imagination to the rhythm of the ocean. The sea deeply wishes it could speak so we could hear the waves of its wisdom and the shivers of its fear of what will come of moving at a fiber optic pace. We forgot what we are when we conquered time and space. And the electronic drum's steady beat becomes a hum. Its velocity can speed beyond a human spectrum. And I know how it feels to ride a hyperbolic curve up toward the top to tap the supersonic nerve. But our bodies are organic, made of moon and sky and earth. We are travelers into death and emergers out of birth. And the water inside you is the water in the sea, is the water in our pipes, and the water inside me. And the water inside you is the water in the sea, is the water in our consequence, and the water inside me. And so, the sea dreams that we will run no faster, that we will stop our endless racing to become each other's master. Stop and hear The mission we're supposed to set in motion to retune imagination to the rhythm of the ocean. Know ourselves to be the heirs of water, land, and air. We are sons of the sun and daughters of the sea. Know ourselves to be heirs of water, land, and air. We are sons of the sun and daughters of the sea. I wrote that before I started using they, them pronouns, and I'm very aware of the binaryness of it now. So the next three were written in response to a project for the Millstone River that's up island in Snuneymuxw territory. It's part of a project that in Hulkaminum was called Hali Ata Stalo, which means being with the river, or being next to the river, because there was no there wasn't in conversation with Gary Manson, there was no name to give this river that in English has a name. So the next three pieces come from having participated in that project with many other artists and going to their different events. So this one was one about soil remediation with folks who are based here in Victoria. Song. It should be higher than that. Usually I do this with the guitar. It's the first time doing this a cappella, people. It's in progress. Song. Song for soil remediation. Live, it's alive. Dirt is earthworm defecation. Heavy metals in our minds, heavy metals in machines, heavy metal pesticides, heavy metal gasolines, heavy metal fertilizers, heavy metals in our screens, heavy metals in the air, heavy metals in our greens, heavy metals in our greens. Vibe, vibe for fungi fermentation. Time for phytodegradation. Heavy metals in our minds, heavy metals in machines, heavy metal pesticides, heavy metal gasolines, heavy metal fertilizers, heavy metals in machines, heavy metals in the air, heavy metals in our greens, heavy metals in our greens. Slow while willow binds accumulation. Tune for mushroom rumination. Song for soil remediation. Song for Ilde Shane. This is another one that I usually perform as a song. I'll read it to you. Ilde Shane is in Manitoba. It's about 20 minutes south of Winnipeg. Off the highway south of Winnipeg in 1983 was a little town where I was brown, and people couldn't see. Yeah, Just south of Winnipeg, near Highway 403, was a little French-Canadian town. Hadn't seen the likes of me. Hey, Madame La, I was born here just like you, in this idea of a country we're all living through. They gave the cold eye to my mother in the local grocery store. At me, they hurled those good old words I'd never heard before. Teacher looked the other way. Fists of gravel in the yard. Mum said, keep your eyes down and it won't go so hard. Mum said, keep your eyes down and it won't go so hard. Hey, Madame La, I was born here just like you, in this idea of a country we're all living through. Up at Saint Vital, they had my dad braid bright ceintures fléchées. They told me to go home, like I would take their land away. They called this river red and taught me songs of Jacques Cartier. They were full of names for things brown people didn't ever really say. And they were full of games, they were running games they wouldn't ever let brown people really play. Full of names like Ile des Chênes, for a place brown people never signed away. Hey, Madame La, I was born here, just like you, in this idea of a country we're all living through. Hey, Monsieur La, I was born here, just like you, in this story of a country one little song cannot undo. In this story of a country one little song cannot undo. Last one. So for this piece was written after walking along the millstone with Nancy Turner, an ethnobotanist, and with Geraldine Manson, an elder, Snuneymuxw elder, whose Halkominum name is Cetacia. So they both spoke together to the group of us and walked along the river. And there was a woman named Elise who asked a question. And so this one is called Elise Asks the Elders. Elise asks the elders about invasive species. She's wondering what we should do. Elise asks the elders about invasive species. She's wondering what we should do. What should we do about the Scotch broom that yellows the meadows and roadsides? How should we treat English holly and English ivy with its ever-spreading vines? Unless you uproot them, they'll choke the ecosystem, the ethnobotanist replies. Unless you uproot them, they'll choke the ecosystem, the ethnobotanist replies. What should we do about the Scotch broom that yellows the meadows and roadsides? Native plants and trees need strong protection, or the tender balance dies. Native plants and trees need strong protection, or the tender balance dies. What should we do about the Scotch broom that yellows the meadows and hydro corridors? How should we treat Himalayan blackberry that trades its sweet fruit for control of countryside. You can't get rid of all of it, says Cetacea. You can't just blitz the land. You can't just pull out everything without hurting the other plants. You've got to go in by hand. You can't just pull out everything, says Cetacea. You can't just blitz the land. You can't just tear out all of it without hurting the other plants. You've got to go in by hand. And that takes time. That takes time. That takes time. That takes time. Elise asks the elders about invasive species. She's wondering what we should do.
Oh, wow, sonnet. I can't wait to the next performance. Thank you. All right, we move to Tim Lilburn, whose bio is just way, 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 way long. It's terrific. I'm not, well, we'll see how it goes. He's a Canadian poet and essayist. Born in Regina, he obtained a BA from the University of Regina, a master's degree in philosophy from Gonzaga University, and his PhD from McMaster. He's the author of several critically acclaimed collections of poetry, including Kill Site, To the River, Moosewood Sandhills, and Going Home. Lilburn's second work, Tourist to Ecstasy, was shortlisted for the Governor-General's Award. In 1995, he received the Canadian Authors Association Award for his work on Moosewood Sandhills. In 2002, his Living in the World as If It Were Home, I love that title, became the winner of the Saskatchewan Nonfiction Book of the Year Award and was finalist for the Saskatoon Book Award. He won the Governor-General's Award in 2003 for his book Kill Site. His work has received global recognition. In 2017, he received the European Medal for Poetry and Art called the Homer, and he was the first Canadian to win this prestigious award. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in 2014. He's the author of 12 books of poetry and essays, and his work has been translated into French, Chinese, Serbian, German, Spanish, and Polish. He used to teach writing at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. And he's actually working, he says, that he now, the joys of retirement, he's working like crazy on his latest book of poetry called Numinous Seditions. He was a judge for the 2011 Griffin Poetry Prize. Just one little comment amongst many. He brings a philosopher's mind and the eyes and ears of a marsh hawk. The series of earthy meditations, this is Kill Site, makes the strange familiar and the familiar strange. He advises, go below the small things, then walk inside them, and you have their kindness. I have to add one more thing. So a couple of years ago, the reader for Planet Earth Poetry's featured Reader Night got stuck in a snowstorm, a strange and unusual thing. And the artistic director called up Tim. Out of the blue, Tim said, sure, came through the snowstorm, gave us a fabulous reading out of the blue, and thank you, Tim, and here he is.
It's working? Yes, it's working. Yeah, I'm going to read poems from a new collection that's just kind of started. There is no, it has no title, uh, the, uh, like no fixed title. The title I'm thinking of is The Volcanoes Held High Snow Note. What do you think of that? What oh, it's provisional. Um, there's a mountain mentioned, I think, in the third poem, and that mountain is a mountain that I think all of us know, but maybe not by this name. In St. Jonathan, this mountain's name is Snaka. And then there's some other introductory stuff I'll say later on. Then, here is where you were coming, pocked, black-purple Big Quill Lake, wind accordioned. To enlist here in the early fall was the plan. Lodged, javelin forehead driven into a slope dugout, clothed and bedded with echoing damp, and roots inches up from the halitotic water, swans swaying in, weight growing with speed to land, pounding rubbled roof. Eye houses everywhere, nights in the mouths of stars. You'd live in the processional slough-edge ground, below a door opening upward to Orion's belt. Elk and deer drinking at the crusty shore, no sickness in their bodies, that mist coming off them. How it would be. Wolves and silence, hungry star, a second or third winter on the tip of your tongue. This next poem, called I Have Oats, is dedicated to Don Damatsky. Some of you may know Don. He had been in these parts a couple of times at Nanaimo, and yeah, you read it, UVic. He died a couple of years ago. A wonderful poet. I Have Oats. Stars tendril nearer, droop, malice. Two man-high height tires, industrial, flake down on a beach south of Campbell River. Three or four bolted together. Green-brown bilge sways in the troughs. The woman renting the cottage near the tires shivers in dread at them and their powers. Stone-voiced wind, a cedar branch slides shrieking along an eave. I set it down. I have the farm of 3 a.m. I have the Soharic field of weeping, dipping oats. All true, but who to say this to? Snow cutting from the north, geese and moon, sea lions change centuries. Tree. The arbutus grows peeling, mastodonic, in the little child's house. He suddenly digests this and penetrates the roof over which its branches spread across torched-on membrane. He's old enough to assault the lords they've boxed in a corner of Abraham's dwelling. The tree terrifies him. How its red stands out against the white walls of the living room. He gathers saws and cutlasses and psychological exemptions. But he quickly notes someone has gone before, some sleepwalker with a chainsaw, fading, lit hand, and had a go at the greatest branch, so that the tree simply halts, stops speaking, well above the ground. What a start to a marriage. Still, he waters plum trees at the base of the cliff because they are dry, and he wishes to stop the fire should it roll down the mountain, rattling blood scales. The fruitless plums are his saints, his beds, which are the jittering, continuous showing of the face that passes like a river beneath him, always quickly under him. This next piece, it's a longer piece. It was written right at the start of the pandemic, and it's called Controlled Burn Theurgy. Another title possibility, I think, maybe ranking around 10 or so. Controlled burn, you know what that is. You light a fire and move it toward another fire. Scene 1, beginning of the pandemic. A stream flows out of the head of the mountain. The stream white waters hummingbirds. A stream out of oak, mouth banked below the tongue slither. Inaugural river saying. Worded a stream comes out of the head of stone cliffs, and from the red moon bulbing from earth near the volcano and the volcano's held high snow note. Language of stream, red moonlight gash on winter harrow strait. Stream of flowers, camas, stream of fawn lily, fish flower, stream of robin, stream of deer, color of waterlogged wood. Language here plucked. Stream of whales, drift logs. Pray for my Aunt Edna, Uncle Jack, and Ronald, the soul's wave. For Louise, Martin, Louise's cousin, and Louise's other cousin and her mother. For Peter Butala and Brother Randy, their blowing souls wave rivers. Hummingbirds hammering stream in mountains thought. Hummingbird in armament and language. The breasts of apple trees send light paths. The streams in night, the star flows, and languages stalking shimmer, and bees coursing to apple tree breasts. Scene 2. I worry about hummingbirds in this cold. Ice spears rattling in the feeder I bring in on the hour. One male locked, staring out of creeping torpor, 4:30 p.m., and grab a darkening perched on a stick in a grow box mounted on the deck railing before the fluorescent explosion window. A February dream. A doe noses out a root behind the kitchen cupboards and forces her neck and head through a gouged hole in one of the doors. I stroke her throat. The new country stands quivering. Its black eye is thrown over me, a tarp, The breasts of apple trees send light paths, charcoal stream in night, cinder drift. The star flows send language as bees make an attempt at apple tree breasts. Scene 3. Later in prayer, I sit on an orange 80s padded vinyl rumpus room gold-legged cocktail stool, straddling a box of unsold copies of Thinking and Singing, Poetry and the Practice of Philosophy, hay-hooked from drifts of loose basement matter, one of 5 boxes at the tail end of prayer, and look at the snow-streaked mountain, which assists its rise to roost in me. How little I have in my head. The moss, cliff, oaks, wild plum groaning out of me. All I do is shuffle my feet. The mountain is dark, the mountain is dark. Fire sent into fire. Its light is dark, beaming ray of its ceremonies.
Thank you, Tim. So beautiful. And our final reader for the evening is Susan Sanford Blades. She is a Canadian novelist and short story writer, lives in Victoria. She's most noted for her debut novel, Fake It So Real, published by Nightwood Editions, which won the 2021 Relit Award for Fiction and was shortlisted for the 2021 Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize. She's also published short stories in literary magazines across Canada and in the USA and Ireland. Her story, The Rest of Him, was a long-listed nominee for the Journey Prize in 2020. Her short story, I love this title, We Did Not Destroy Your Public Library, as read by actor Andrea Skoretz, can be heard on the debut episode of Stories Less Spoken podcast. In an interview with Hannah McCready in Event December 2020, Susan discussed what one colleague called crust fiction. Her characters live on the outskirts of what is normal or what is acceptable, so like the hard outer edge, the crust of society. She's also been called a punk rock Alice Munro. Another critic, Alexander McCloud, states, "No one rocks a sentence like Susan Sanford Blades." And Hannah McCready adds, "I think what I loved most about Fake It So Real are the visceral, horrible, beautiful details that you embed in your images." Fun fact, at her launches, especially during COVID, she'd play music bingo after a reading, and the playlist was made up of songs which were influenced by the novel's main characters. The songs were either mentioned in the book or they reflected the character's personality or something that went through in the book. We have a new thing to begin. Welcome, Susan.
I think, is this working? Yes, okay. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I was supposed to have a dance party at my book launch, but we had to turn it into music bingo because of the pandemic. So for this new one, there's going to be a dance party. I just want to thank Laura and the VFA for asking me to come here tonight. This is my first festival appearance, so I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to be reading from a new novel that I'm just kind of in final editing stages of. It's about an 18-year-old girl named Frances. She's living in Edmonton in the mid-90s, and I'm going to read a bit from a chapter sort of later into the novel. This novel's it has a plot, but it's mostly kind of just about being an 18-year-old girl and the 90s and the Riot Girl movement, which was like a punk feminist movement in the early 90s. It's kind of, Frances considers herself a riot girl, and it's kind of an influence throughout the book. And this chapter is about girl jealousy, girl hating another girl, and how do you reconcile that with calling yourself a feminist? It's about how, like, when there's this person who's like really similar to you, but like better at everything, and you just kind of hate her and want her to not exist in your world. So in this chapter, Frances's best friend Lil has started dating a younger skateboarder named Gavin, and Gavin has a friend who's like the only female skateboarder at their high school, and her name is Skater Girl. And Lil becomes kind of enamored with Skater Girl, and Frances is very jealous. So I'm going to read the beginning of the chapter and then just kind of like jump ahead and read the end of the chapter. So just so that you understand everything that's going on, I'll just explain a few things. At one point, she's going to mention her mother being jealous, and this is because her father is sort of mentoring a young woman at work, and Frances's mother is not feeling super cool about that. I'll mention Travis, who works at the record store. He is Lil's ex-boyfriend. Craig is Travis's friend, who also works at the record store. Frances made out with him in his car a few months earlier and then kind of became bored with him halfway through. And finally, she'll mention Christian, who is the boy that Frances is obsessed with throughout the novel. Okay, so this chapter is called There's Something About Betty. I spent most of my girlhood sweating into nylon leotards in a mirrored funhouse called Miss Shirley's School of Dance. Miss Shirley was a former corps de ballet dancer, but we saw her as a warning rather than inspiration. Her hips and backside were a rumpled set of elephant ears that seemed only loosely associated with the thighs they housed. She took every step as though directing a peg leg through an obstacle course. My ballet class was ruled by a clique of spaghetti-thin, blue-eyed blondes whose names all ended in IE. I treaded water at the fickle membrane of that clique and would be granted brief passage depending on the quality of my snacks or the blondies' need for a spare meter of toe tape or a flame with which to singe the fraying ends of their point shoe ribbons. And then there was Elizabeth Kim. Elizabeth was a terrible dancer. She slouched asymmetrically as though one shoulder was magnetically drawn to the floor. Her hands were like scuba flippers at the ends of her rigid, twiggy arms, and she flung herself like a used car lot's inflatable being with her every pas de chat. But the thing about Elizabeth, the infuriating difference between her and me that made me want to rip a hole in the crotch of her leotard and smother her with a bun net, was that she didn't care. She endured class with a lazy smirk across her face, as though it was a comedy routine, as though at any moment she'd turn toward an imagined audience and shrug to a laugh track at her ineptitude. She acted as if a little girl's worth could be measured by more than the curve of her arch, as though perhaps the blondies were the pathetic ones. And I hated her because it hadn't occurred to me to do the same. Okay, so now we're going to skip to later on in the chapter. So Frances is now 18. Like I said, her best friend Lil is dating a younger skateboarder named Gavin, and Elizabeth from her childhood dance class is now Betty, aka Skater Girl. Springtime in Edmonton was a slushy tease. A cutoffs one day, parkas the next, puddle jumping dance. It snowed overnight, and I spent the next few days at school with Lil, uninterrupted by skateboarders and their riders, or skateboards and their riders. Lil and I sloshed through our days wet-footed, pondering questions such as, at what age would we need to start jazzercising to maintain the buoyancy of our asses? Have you ever hated a girl? I asked. Of course, but like a nemesis, like in a psycho way. Who do you hate? Like, have you ever felt this hatred that like eats you from the inside? But seriously, who do you hate? It's like I could like her, like we could be friends, but she doesn't like me, so I hate her. How do you know this girl doesn't like you? Women's intuition. It's not very Riot Girl to hate another girl, but it is Riot Girl to embrace my rage. Even at a girl? It's like we're given this little corner of space, and we're supposed to love all the girls who sit their fat asses in our space. What space? Like, just my space. Like, for me to be me. Like, the attention I'm allowed to get. Is it Betty? As if. When Edmonton's puddles were inhaled once again by the backwashing slurpy straw of spring, Lil and I returned to Skona's tennis courts. Lil had used her seduction of Gavin as an opportunity to adopt a new look. Her legs now dog-paddled for their lives under a lake of denim, and she wore a pair of pink suede etnies she'd dragged me into plush to buy with her. I'm dating a skater, so she'd explained toward the clerk's poser accusing gaze. Lil had been toying with skateboarding, rolling on Gavin's board while he smoked, collecting Betty's wayward board and unsuccessfully attempting ollies. You're so close, Betty said, but something's weighing you down. Maybe it's those giant pants, I said. Maybe it's who you were, Betty said. Like who you think you're supposed to be. Lil shrugged. I'm not that athletic, she said. Skateboarding's not a sport. It's a state of mind, Betty said. Maybe she doesn't want to, I said. Maybe she could make up her own mind, Betty said. Aren't you a feminist? Yeah. Well, you're being pretty patronizing. Betty squatted onto her board and turned to Lil. So, Saturday, are you going Pogue or Vogue? She asked. Huh? I said. The Rev? Me and Lil are going to the 80s retro dance party, Betty said. The theme's Pogues and Vogues. I was going to tell you, Lil said. Yeah, Betty tilted her head toward me. I would have asked you, but I didn't think you were 18 yet. You seem so young. I think I'll go Pogue, Lil said. I've got lots of great plaid. You too, I bet, Betty said to me, because you're so punk, right? I shook my head. Madonna to the max, I said. So you're coming? Lil asked. Lil squeezed my hand in the most condescending way. The choking care I imagined she'd offer Gavin's hand before she left him for someone older and meaner. I got up then and kissed Lil goodbye and walked down 109th Street, toward the river, toward Blackbird Music. I was propelled by the image of my mother, quietly seething in her little pink apron, smiling flatly at the young woman who'd commanded her husband's attention. My mother, adopting my father's infatuation in lieu of her jealousy in a ridiculous attempt at maturity, reducing herself to quiet servitude in order to remain as some useful crumb in his consciousness. At Blackbird Music, I flipped through the new releases bin and tossed a hey toward Travis behind the counter. Hey, he said, how's things? Good. How's Lil? Good, kind of annoying. Still dating that little skater baby? More like stringing him along. How about you? Single. Same. He held up a hand and said, up top. I high-fived to singlehood, and then I asked him if he knew Betty Kim. Skater girl? She thinks you're cute. Yeah? Yeah, she told me so. You going to the Rev Saturday? I'm down with the Pogues. Sweet. We'll be there too. Me and Betty. And Lil, obviously. Obviously. Maybe we'll see you there. Maybe. On my walk home, I imagined myself a sultry soap opera villain, a manipulative, shape-shifting sea witch. A woman who took action, whose ends justified her means. I would make a grand entrance at the Rev that Saturday. I'd swing the door open just as Betty and Travis's tongues collided. The spotlight would turn from them to me in my silver cone bra and high ponytail. Lil would run to me and we'd march out, arm in arm, but not before performing a jaw-dropping choreographed dance to Like a Prayer while the dance floor opened to swallow Betty and Travis into the city's nether realm. In actuality, I wore an assortment of neon spandex left over from various Miss Shirley's recitals and painted my eyelids with the brightest blues in my mother's crusty palette of shadows. I got a ride to the Rev with Lil and Betty in her friend Scott's turquoise Geo Tracker. Betty yelled over Scott's Ween cassette that she couldn't believe I still fit into the cheesy costumes from that fucking dance class. Then she added that she guessed it was because I hadn't grown any boobs since then. Travis did show up at the Rev, with Craig at his side. The two of them stood at the edge of the dance floor, their hands filled with cigarettes and frothy pints. They engaged in a mouth-to-ear nodding conversation, most likely about the subsequent decline of each Madonna album since her self-titled debut. Craig hadn't even looked my way since he entered the bar. It was as though he could see the droop-shouldered, head-bowed, flaccid image of him that lived inside my mind. I could think of no way to reassure but not encourage him, so I ignored him too. Travis predictably seduced Betty with his nihilistic charm at the bar, beginning with an offered cigarette and ending with sacrilegious grinding to Where's the Party on the dance floor. But instead of turning to me when it happened, Lil turned her booty to Craig's convenient crotch, draped her languid arm around his shoulder and neck. This was the very same Craig I made out with in the IGA parking lot months earlier. Even though in my description to Lil of our encounter, I'd used the expression ew, and I'd called him kind of a freak and grossly polite, this didn't change the fact that I touched him first. It didn't make him any less off limits. There I floated in the midst of all that betrayal. I wound my hips and I fell into Scott, a lanky and oblivious shaft of wheat swaying with the crowd. Scott was asexual as a muppet, but still human, still teenage boy enough to respond to my back against his fanny sack, to slip his fleshy wings up my shirt, to stumble out of the bar at closing time, sucking wetly at my corners like a flailing vacuum hose. And Lil and I were teenage girl enough to find each other outside, to shed ourselves of all excess humans and walk hand in hand across the bridge toward home. For reals, Lil said. Betty's the chick you hate, right? Totes. I hate her too. How is Craig? A bit psycho. Told you so. How about Scott? He's not Christian. Do you think you actually like Christian, though? What do you mean? Like, do you like him, or do you just like liking him? I really like that gap between his front teeth. That gap is dead sexy. I never told Lil that I'd orchestrated Travis and Betty's union, just as she never acknowledged breaking girl code with Craig. Nothing seemed to matter as long as she hated who I hated. We'd spent our girlhoods being nice to protect our mothers. We'd spend our womanhoods being mature to protect our choices, the paths our lives would take. But that night, we were 18. We were not girls and not women. We acted on impulse and ignored the consequences. We were the most feminist revolt of all. We were wanton. We were careless. We were ugly.
Oh, these glimpses into new work is just, they're marvelous. So thank you all, and we will be back in 15 minutes after an intermission, and we get to ask questions and get responses. So see you all in a little bit.
a really cool panel. I've never seen anything like it. This like new works, us sharing things that are a little bit scary to share. And I want to thank Laura for sort of wrangling me when I spend, too much time responding to emails. And thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for coming out on this slightly rainy Wednesday evening, or, Zooming in wherever you happen to be. So I am reading from an essay collection that I've started writing, and I usually describe it as, I'm writing a book about video games, because I told myself, I'm never writing another memoir again. It was too hard. It took me 6 years, and living with all of that in my head for that 6 years was a lot. It was really difficult. And I had sort of 3 things living in my head that I thought I wanted to do next, but it was the video game essay collection that actually I was able to get some momentum on. And it's not just about video games, it's also about mental health and attention and narrative and memory. I've been reading a lot of physics that I don't totally understand, that I am trying to understand. And I have a husband who's an engineer, and he does his best to answer all of my questions about, like, what is, like, a proton? And then what is energy? Can you perceive energy in any other way than the way that it interacts with mass? And he didn't know how to answer that one, so I'm still waiting for that answer. But the way that the collection is structured is each essay is a different genre of video game. And the one that I'm reading from tonight is called Simulation. When I feel like I'm losing my mind, construction and management simulation is the genre I turn to most often. Think SimCity. The player becomes autocrat, vested with absolute power and control. In city builders, this means making decisions about zoning, budgets, resource allocation, and access to public education or parks. In an amusement park simulator like Parkosaurus, the happiness and well-being of hot pink dinosaurs is weighed against food costs, ticket sales, and 5-star reviews. And though simulators mirror aspects of the real world, everything is simplified. As mayor, I don't need to work with the city council to approve my budget or strategic plan. I'm not beholden to my residents, whose individual lives are insignificant to the game's forward trajectory. I don't need to schedule town hall meetings to field my residents' complaints about their increased property taxes. And when I demolish an old neighborhood to build a bougie commercial district and luxury high-rises, I know the family in the wood-paneled station wagon will quietly leave the city. A tech worker in a sleek sedan will take their place, and no one will utter a word about gentrification. RimWorld, a sci-fi colony management simulator, opens with a crash landing. Your ultimate goal is to orchestrate your survivors' escape from a planet on the outer edges of colonized space. But at the beginning of the scenario, their basic needs are most pressing: food, shelter, and sufficient entertainment to keep their minds off their new reality. You shape this reality. Out of all the colonists aboard the ship, only 3 survive. You are given the power to decide which do. To increase your colony's chance of survival, it's important to balance your colonist skills, even if it means their father, mother, or romantic partner may not escape the wreckage. These skills are divided into 12 categories that correspond with functional tasks around the colony, like shooting, cooking, crafting, and even artistic production, but some are more critical than others. A colony can get pretty far without an artist, but if you forget to select a pawn with a natural aptitude for cooking, you run the risk of food poisoning. And then you've got colonists vomiting in the halls, dragging themselves to sick beds, burning through your medical supplies. You decide how many supplies your colonists are able to salvage from the crash site, as well as the level of their technological know-how. You choose where on the world map their ship crashes, which means you could bless them with a long growing period and mild winter, or you could damn them to life in a blistering desert surrounded by hostile settlements. And one of the game's content expansions, you can customize the ideological system from which your colony's society and culture emerge. How do they feel about eating meat, wearing clothing, or the subjugation of their fellow human beings? These belief systems can work for or against them. A vegetarian will have a hard time come winter if your harvest fails. A nudist doesn't need fancy clothes, but they also won't do well in extremes of hot and cold. And a colony willing to exploit human labor will yield greater resources for less, but they also risk social unrest. Most of the time, I prefer to play simulation games devoid of conflict. I am interested only in building traffic-clogged roads and pleasing parks, so I turn off mechanics like extreme weather events to dodge tornadoes that flatten neighborhoods, tsunamis that flood my expensive transit systems. For me, the game's tension is driven by the peaks and valleys of my income and expenses. If I've planned well, I can afford a new medical center to enhance the wellness of my citizens. If I've kept my lenders happy, I can borrow enough money to splurge on a stadium that will boost tourist revenue. If I haven't, I cut a few bus routes and defund education until I reach fiscal parity. But RimWorld is conflict. Its systems and mechanics center each pawn's experiences, their successes and failures, and the map becomes a landscape textured with memory. At the 2017 Game Developers Conference, Tynan Sylvester, RimWorld's developer, was invited to give a talk on the game design principles that informed RimWorld's development. From very early on, I said specifically and explicitly that RimWorld is not a game, he told the audience, then repeated, "It's not a game. RimWorld is not a game." A game, according to his definition, is a skill test. If you play well, you win. If you play better than others, you win bigger or better rewards. The consequences of failure are rarely significant. You roll back to an earlier save, maybe you lose a bit of money or experience, but the progress you've made is never lost for long. And without significant consequences, skill testing games lose the ability to tell good stories. What does Tynan believe makes a story good? Narrative tension. An early complaint about RimWorld was its unforgiving difficulty. Even if one played well, random in-game events could too easily lead to loss or defeat. I've started at least 50 scenarios, and I still haven't beaten one. But for Tynan, victory isn't the point. He calls RimWorld a story generator, and the in-game events that make the game so hard are what drive its narrative potential. Because if victory isn't the point, neither is total defeat. Loss is an essential part of story, he tells the audience, not its conclusion. A game's mechanics should create the potential for both loss and recovery, and in RimWorld, mood mechanics are one of the aspects that reflect this duality. Colonists begin a scenario with low expectations, which reflect the state of your colony. Low food stores, few material possessions, and limited entertainment. Nutrient paste isn't the most appetizing, but it's better than going hungry. Steel flooring is ugly and uncomfortable, but it's better than sleeping on the ground. They're invested with initial optimism, grateful for their lives, and it doesn't take too much to keep them content. Maybe they rescued a fellow colonist for plus 18 points. Maybe they got some lovin' plus 8 points. Or a cute animal has nuzzled their leg for plus 4. Maybe they just took a break from work and spent the afternoon gazing at clouds, plus 5. Happy pawns are productive pawns. They work harder, move faster, and your colony functions best when you're able to keep everyone's mood high. Pawns accumulate mood penalties through negative experiences like hunger, exhaustion, and pain, each to varying degrees. Missing a meal is bothersome, starvation insurmountable. A bruised rib hurts, but a severed leg causes mind-shattering pain. Witnessing death, experiencing grief are also assigned different weights. The mood penalty assigned to the loss of a spouse, the flavor text is "I am alone," or child, "my own flesh and blood," is devastating, minus 20 points. Losing a lover ranks lower at negative 16. Losing a beloved pet, Such a tender, unique animal, the universe is evil, with an exclamation point, costs half that at -8. A dead niece or nephew stings at -5, a dead grandparent -4. The young preceding the old in death is difficult to reconcile, but witnessing the demise of an outsider, regardless of age, hardly registers on the emotional scale at -3. The colony's resilience is at test, and it often feels like the more your colonists have, the less happy they will be. This feeling is a product of the game's mechanics. The more wealth your colony accumulates, the higher their expectations become. They want fancier meals, more leisure time, and beautiful, expansive living quarters. A missed meal, a disturbed night's rest, an old injury. Each adds to the mental load your colonists carry. Chronically low moods can lead to mental break, but it's difficult to predict what the final straw might be. Tynan calls this elastic failure, a concept he borrows from mechanical engineering. A material's elasticity is its ability to return to its original state after distortion. As the colony manager, you can improve your colonists' moods by granting them additional recreation time, supplying them with alcohol, drugs. But any material, any mind, has the potential to fail under compounding stress. Thank you.
Okay, here we are again. So this time round, I'm going to ask a question, and open it up to all 4 of the writers, and they get to have kind of a conversation with each other. So and then when things seem to slow down, I'll throw in another question and we'll see how it all goes. Okay. So, and we might not get to all the questions, but so be it. I'm going to start with my question number 2. So is this new work something different than what you've done before? Is it as a continuation or a new path? So there's a quote by Jill Kerr-Conway who says, "You never know what you'll want to write until it starts writing itself in your head." Is that what happens to you, or do you plan each step carefully? So how does the work arise in you? Who wants to start?
Paper, rock, scissors?
Yeah.
I could.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. I always set out when.
Use your microphone.
Oh, sorry, Mike. I always set out, like once a project finishes, and I kind of recover from the exhaustion of the project finishing, I always set out with an idea that I would like to do something new, and I would like to, I'd like to scare myself. I'd like to reach farther, but I would say, I mean, even though I have that hope, I would say in a sense the writing has its own mind, and yeah, it just goes or doesn't go.
Like when I started this novel I'm writing, I was like, okay, this one's gonna actually have a plot, and like something is going to happen, and it was going to be about like a riot girl band, and there was going to be some sort of like rising action and conflict. And I started writing that, and it was just like, this just isn't, it's not me, and it's not working. And then I started all over again, and with what I currently have, yeah, I think you just need to sort of like you said, let the writing do its thing. And you asked if this was similar to our first or to our previous book. Yeah, so I think with this, I feel like I sort of have these like stories from my life that need to come out before I can write something different. So like my first book was about sort of my time as like a young mother and dealing with like separation and divorce and being a mother. And this one is kind of like about being a daughter and being a teenage girl, particularly in the 90s. And I just wanted to explore all of that sort of that time where like consent wasn't a thing that like anybody cared about or knew about, and I sort of needed to delve into that. So this book is kind of similar to my first one in that it's sort of somewhat autobiographical or coming from me, but yeah, it's also different in the sense that it's like more of a novel, more of each chapter doesn't totally stand on its own. And like you, like it's sort of, it's got like different elements to it. Like it has graphic elements to it. Frances writes a zine, and like the issues of her zine are in the book. So there's like a really like raw element to it, and then a more like a distant narration too.
I mean, I guess y'all heard that I'm just doing something different than books, and it's been scary, I would say, to listen to those impulses, right? Like for me, it's the same impulse. It's a poetic impulse. It's a desire to use language in a way that communicates in short little chunks, and comes from some kind of earnest, honest, maybe more earnest than honest, I don't know, place. And yeah, I'm frankly still a little terrified that I'm working in this genre, but it has helped. It's helped me come back into maybe why I write. Like I just was in my head. I felt like I had really gotten into my head, and that I could almost only speak in a way that made sense to me, like through my fingers sitting at a screen. And physically it wasn't working for me anymore. I found that if I was going to create, to have to sit down for more hours at the screen when my job has me sitting at a screen for a lot of time, that just was feeling unsustainable for a while. So what I have loved about this new work is that I live in Nanaimo, and so the literary community is smaller, and the opportunities to share and just be an artist that's out there working in community is easier to do with songs. And the same thing that I can bring to a gallery, I can bring the same piece of work to a gallery as to the Nanaimo bar, where folks are coming back from Fort Mac to grab a drink. And that way of being able to make a little story travel is really exciting to me.
I found the pieces that you read and sung tonight quite moving, and it seemed to me that you had found another way to make poetry appear. You know, like it's not the kind of rationalized left margin, and it like you kind of liberated it, just as you had in your previous book, Song of Shakespeare. Like that, the most exciting thing about that book is a kind of revolution in form. And I think for me, to my ears, something, it's the same sort of revolutionary activity, but I found it liberating.
Thank you. That means a lot, because I can hear, your great ears. I can hear your ears in your work. So that means a lot.
What was the question? Seriously, what was the question?
What was the question?
Yeah.
Okay, we were far away from it. Is this new work something different from what you've done before? Is it a continuation, or is it a new path? And is the writing just happening in your head, or are you planning it carefully?
Yes, no, yes, and yes, definitely. I think everybody knows that, if anybody knows anything that I've written, I started off in memoir. And anybody who's written memoir knows that, you spend a lot of time in your own head. It's therapeutic in a way, but it's also really difficult, hard work. So when I wrote my first memoir, Woodland Creatures, I couldn't go back to writing it anymore. I wanted to take a break. I needed to take a break. My editor, my publisher all knew that. So a word to the to the emergings and the aspirings: listen to your editor, listen to your publisher. They know better. I needed the break, so we changed it to fiction. Although the book is loosely based on my childhood, it was a little more liberating in the sense that I wasn't always inside my own head. I got to experiment and have some fun, and that just sort of lit a fire. It changed my perspective about where I could be as a writer, or what I wanted to do as a writer. I didn't want to be typecast. I don't want to be a memoirist my entire life. It's too hard. So I went into horror fantasy. I had to. I'm a big, huge Stephen King fan. So reading almost every book of his, it's kind of inspired this particular next project. It was scary getting into it. Did it write itself? I started writing this in 2011, and when I finished my stint at SFU for the Writer's Studio, I really started focusing on it. And after I published the fiction My Indian Summer, that's all I'm focusing on. I'm not thinking about my life as a child or a man or a boy or a teenager struggling with that shit that that we all struggle with, because I don't give a fuck about it anymore. I want to move forward. I want to my rear view mirror is really small. And, I'm driving down the highway, I'm looking where I'm going, I'm looking for road signs. And that's what this project is all about. It's also about, indigeneity. It's also about truth. And it can be hard for some people to listen to, but it's the truth. And so that's why I'm doing it.
Great, thank you. There's something about being the third person rather than the first person that makes some interesting changes obviously in your perspective. So you brought up Stephen King being a great fan, which brings us to another question is, since we're all learning all the time, who would you say you have learnt from? Who are your mentors in some way? Who are your influences? And on the other side, who do you think you are influencing as well?
I'm going to start this one. Daryl J. McLeod is one of my mentors, one of my influencers. He's an extremely serious support. I also I talk to Lawrence Hill every now and again. We had a discussion last week about managing the writing career. Sue Goyette, a poet from back east. We talk often. There's so many people out there. Wal Bryce. He's been very supportive. And who am I influencing? I don't know. I hope, if anything, I hope that maybe not perhaps influence, but inspire young Indigenous people, old Indigenous people, women Indigenous people to speak their mind, stop being so quiet about what they have experienced in Canada. There's a lot of unspoken truths that really do need to be brought out into the light, and as uncomfortable as it is, I hope that I inspire those people to speak up and tell their stories, because if we don't, we're going to keep on making the same mistakes as a nation, as a people.
Who wants to take it up?
Okay, why not? I get a lot of sustenance and influence, I would say, from my colleagues at VIU, right? Who I can see doing the same thing, teaching and writing at the same time, and folks at BRIC, like River Halen, like Nick Thran, like Sue Sinclair, Cecily Nicholson, all of those folks, Elena Muntz. The conversations that I have with those folks when we're reading poetry, and folks at the Malahat, for me are like soul food to be able to have, and the folks that I've edited, like Jan Kahn, D.B. Bradford, Aaron Robinsong, like those meetings where we're having editorial level conversation is I don't know, maybe because Tim's in the room, I'm like, holy, it's like, really, no, seriously, it's not every other human being on the planet that wants to take the time to talk about the resonance of language in all its resonances, right? And it's really magical to me. So I live for that. And then I guess, given that I'm in the position to teach, there's all kinds of people that come under my influence that I need to think about. And I'm pretty, you know, I'm pretty proud, I think, of how I try my best to be who I am in the institution. And when I say that, you know, I'm trying to write because I'm thinking of my own voice, like I'm really thinking about what it meant to come up in the institution and be taught in a certain way to put my voice on the literary page. And there's a sense of like resistance in trying to just speak directly from the body. So right now in my poetry class, we are listening to Sun Ra, we are dancing, we are pulling tarot cards while we're reading Chandra Prescott Weinstein's book on particle physics and being a black particle physicist. Like, you know, I think a bit of twerking in the institution is what we need to like loosen us all up a bit. So yeah.
Because it feels like a conversation. Never really not holding on to these things. Turn it on.
It should.
Is it on? No. I think it's on. No, it's not on. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, I'm interested in. I mean, now over the last couple of years, I've been interested in writers that are, well, international, like say the Kurdish poet and activist Bejan Matur. I don't know if you, has anyone heard of Bejan Matur? Wow. Well, you're in for a treat when you finally track her down. Or the West African poet Christopher Kigbo. I've been in love with his work from the very beginning. And this tremendous generation in China that appeared, I'd say in the 90s, kind of mid-90s, people like Sichuan, Ouyang Zhangke, Jiang Ming, brilliant. So, yeah, I'm interested in listening in on what they're doing and the tack that they're taking. Oh, God only knows, if any. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I definitely learned a lot from my MFA supervisor, Lorna Jackson, just about how to trim down my prose, cut out all the excessive, is that the word? The extra words. You know, just things like you don't need to say she thought, just say the thought. And yeah, just from authors that I read and that I love what they're doing. And I'm not sure if I'm necessarily learning anything. Like I wish I was. Like I'll read something and I'll be like, oh, I wish I could write like that. And then I try and it's like, it's still just me coming out. But I think it influences me in some way. Like I just read Daughter by Claudia Day, which was like the last book that I was just like, damn you, like this is so good. But like I love it. I love it as a reader. I hate it as a writer. I mean, I don't hate it, but I'm like so envious. Like, I wish I could do that. And yeah, I think, well, also a book I read recently was called Brutes by Diz Tate, written in a first-person collective voice, a bunch of young girls, and that is what I want to do for my next book after this one. Like, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want to do that. It's like the we voice. So yeah, I think just books I read, I'm always inspired by, and I don't think I'm influencing anyone, but what I really love is just like when what I write connects with people. And a young woman just talked to me out in the intermission and was like, "Oh, what you read is totally just the way I talk with my friends," and I was like, "Yes." That's what I'm here for. Like, that's what I want to do. I just want people to read what I write and feel a connection. I think that's what books are all about. So that was great. Thank you for pulling me aside and telling me that.
Thank you for your answers. Is this working? Yes. Good. All right. I think we'll have time for one more question. So, and this is my question because I struggle with this one, and that is editing. Like, what happens? So you get the inspiration down on the page, and you think it's marvelous, and then 2 weeks later you look at it and you know it is just shit. And then what do you do, and what is your editing process?
Have a little cry.
Yeah, big cry.
I use reading quite a bit in my editing. And another poet I hadn't mentioned, Maria Sabina, who is, I don't think she saw herself as a poet. I think she saw herself as a healer and a chanter, a Mexican genius. I'll be reading her and I'll think, she would not say that. What you have said, she would not say that. So just like pare it out. And it's not, I mean, I would love to sound like her, but I will never sound like her. So there's no danger of imitation, but it's, or Robert Duncan or Demansky, whatever. Yeah. So kind of edit through reading.
I kind of edit, that resonated with me, what you just said. I'm a really slow writer. Like a lot of people say if you're writing a novel, you're supposed to just like vomit out a novel and then fix it later. And I can't do that. So I'll write it, and then when I sit down to write the next day, I'll read over everything I've done and pick it apart, the words. And like Tim said, I do think that I'm like, if I were reading this and I read that, would I be like, ugh, like would I appreciate this the way I appreciated, reading this book? Would this author that I love ever let a sentence like that be in a book of theirs? No. So yeah, if I don't like it, I can't move forward until I like what I've done. And then I do have writing group, which I very much rely on. I send my stuff to a lot of people. Actually, I was watching this panel from last year on YouTube. And I think Yasuko Tan said her editor is like the person who tells her she has lipstick on her teeth before leaving the house. And I thought, yeah, that's perfect. Like, I rely on other people to be like, no, don't put that out into the world. Or my sort of like weak points or like points of laziness that I think, how you've been lazy and you're like, maybe no one will notice. Maybe we can send this out. And then the writing group is like, if they find it, then I know I need to fix it. Or like setting details. That's something I tend to just like focus on what's going on inside my characters and not deal with setting. So they're like, maybe we should know where these people are in the physical world right now, like things like that. So, yeah, that's my process.
Who was it that spent the morning putting in a comma and spending the afternoon taking it out? That was, what was it, Hemingway? Anyway, what, Flaubert? It could be. Somebody. So, yes, that kind of editing.
I've heard that one before. Yeah, for sure. I've always read things out loud, and tried to see how they sound. So now I have to do that in front of people, right? Like I literally have no sense of if it's a good performance piece. I can't test it out at home. Even just reading it out loud does not work, or singing it for myself does not work. I have to do that. So that's the new editing process. Yeah.
Scary one.
I did that totally, like my thing that I read. I have all these like crossed out because I was practicing and I was like, oh my God, I can't say that in front of people. That's so bad. Like, it is a really good way to edit. Just pretend you're going to be like reading it in front of people. And then if there's something you'd be embarrassed to say, then you're like, oh, maybe that's not good. Maybe I should take that out.
I think reading it out is probably one of my sharper tools I have in my little editing tool shed, even at home. And I am a vomiting type writer. I write off the seat of my pants. That's my editor told me. But I can puke out 5,000 words in a day. I've done it before. I do it all the time. But I'll be lucky to get 1,000 words out of that. So there's an awful lot of work in my editing process. I make a lot of work for myself, but it's mostly, I think, just because I wanna experiment more. So when I'm first writing it, it's all experimental. It's all just thoughtless writing. Just get it out there, get it out there. I don't give a fuck what it sounds like, as long as I get it out. Because I know that. Somebody, I don't know which poet it was that said, sometimes you can hear genius coming down the ways. It's like a freight train. And if you're not in the right place to write that idea down, you're going to miss it. It goes right by you. So write it all down and deal with the pieces later. And that's what my editor's for. That's what my beta readers are for. That's what, Daryl J. McLeod is for. Thank you, Daryl. But yeah, it's. I think if there's any tool that I use in my tool shed, it's reading it out loud, making sure that flow is consistent, is hitting all the marks, is doing what I want it to do. Because I really don't. It's not that I don't want to write a good story. I want to write a good story, but I want to write my good story. As an Indigenous writer, sometimes you get stuck in the English of it all. You can't tell an Indian story without having some grammar Nazi come along and say you can't use this preposition with that clause, or your subject and your predicate are reversed, and I don't give a fuck if it's reversed. It's storytelling Indian style, right? So, yeah. Suck it up.
Oh, wow. So I have a couple more questions. There are probably questions you'd like to ask, but it is 9:30, and I think less is more. But we have had, I think, a wonderful more, and there are books out there, and there are the authors to sign the books, and a chance for you to ask them questions. So I think, is Cynthia around? She's going to end us. So I want to thank all of you for being able to be with you up here with these horrible lights and to share all of your work. And I just can't wait for them to come when they come. And I think we'll all be sitting in there waiting. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Indeed, thank you. And I assure you there are people out there, even though you can't see them. Oops. So yes, just a few little bits of business for the festival. First of all, to thank you for attending, and also to thank especially the moderator and authors, Joseph Gaguinoganasum. Sonnet Labe. No, I don't. Tim Lilburn and Susan Sanford Blades, thank you very much. Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. And also, of course, thank you to our moderator, Barbara Pellman. So, as Barbara said, there are books available sold by Monroe's out there, so please do take a look and speak to the authors and have them sign their work. Also, there are more festival events coming up, so please refer to your program. Our website features Q&As with all the authors participating, and a place for you to sign up to our newsletter. So please refer to victoriafestivalofauthors.ca. And if you would like to support the festival in another way, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram and encourage your friends to attend one of our upcoming events. You can also make a tax-deductible donation to Victoria Festival of Authors through our website or on VFA's page at Canada Helps. Your donations help to keep VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. We hope to see you again. Thank you so much. Good night.